Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Poem story. This week's poem is called How Much, written in the full knowledge of adulthood. And the reason why it has that additional title is because, as you may have seen last week, I did include two poems in the collection Between Hindsight and Foresight that contained the same title. I was unaware that I'd used the title before, after I'd already decided to use this poem, the one written as an adult. I only found that I had previously used the title when I was going through old material to decide what to include in the volume from my older poems. And when considering whether or not I should include two poems with the same title, I decided that I should include them both because they do show how I look at love and how I interact with my hopeless romantic side in two completely different ways. One is that hopeful, youthful idea of looking for that love. And this one, the How Much, written as an adult, was written with full knowledge of what having a love like that is and what losing a love like that feels. So it's obviously a very emotionally charged poem that, as I said last week, reminds me of a song that I was completely unaware of, the song, when I wrote the poems. But Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell does have the same kind of emotional duality that both of my poems, How Much, contain. The first four verses are the original poem, How Much, written as a youth. From verse 5 on, however, is more like how I felt when I wrote How Much as an adult. This emotionally charged poem was written in my 30s when I was losing a relationship that was very important to me. And the first two verses of the poem, How Much, written as an adult, are kind of what everybody goes through when they are in the middle of a breakup, an important breakup, or a breakup of a relationship that was important, where you question and you wish that you could go back in time and look at things that you did and go back to the way things used to be. A number of different relationships can change and can go wrong in little ways, and little ways that snowball into bigger ways, and then bigger ways that go into kind of an immeasurable gap. And we always think, where did I lose a step? Where did I stop feeling what I felt at the beginning? And so the first two verses of this poem are reflective of that, where it's between me and another person. You know, would you do this? Would you go back if you could? Would you go back with me to the beginning, to how we used to feel, to how we used to be, and remember that and try to hold on to that, or try to make sure we don't lose that? And it's a we, and it's a conversation between the narrator and the person she's speaking to. Verse 3 and 4 are more about talking to myself, and more about the person alone in the ending of the relationship, and that now singular wish to be able to have what you had at the beginning back, and the fact that it feels like you would give anything to have that feeling back the way it used to feel instead of how it feels now. And so we've all had that wish to go back to the good beginnings of a relationship, do something different, do something better, to lost what we had or what we thought we had at the beginning of a relationship. And the feeling that you want that back is something that a lot of people feel when they are ending a relationship with somebody that they love. And it doesn't matter if, as a hopeless romantic or as an idealist or an optimist, that the beginning of the relationship that you remember is not the real beginning of the relationship. It's more about not what it was, but what it felt like to be in that relationship, to be in that emotion, that feeling. And so by the end of the poem, even though the narrator is alone, and the relationship is definitely coming to a close, there's still that desperate want to have the beginning back. And so the last verse is purposely reflective of that repetitive, desperate need, that that wish to go back. I would give anything to go back to that. And whereas in the second verse is, would you give anything to give that back? How much would you be willing to give to get that back? And so whereas last week, the one I talked to you about with the how much in youth is, how much would you give to let me in? This is, how much would you give to have it back? So that play on words of how much is why I decided to keep them both. Because how much do you want it before you have it? And how much would you give to keep it? Are questions that we all think about when we think about romance and our hearts and what we strive for, what we need from another person to be part of our own lives, to be part of ourselves. So after all of that, after the hopeful youth and the full knowledge of an adult, I still think of myself as a hopeless romantic. I still think of myself as being willing to give a lot in order to get a lot, to have that exchange of how much would you give to me to be part of my life, how much would I give to you to have you be part of my life. It should be an equal balance. And what I learned as an adult is, if that balance isn't equal and both sides don't want to give it all, then it does end. And that's probably how it should be. But the ever-present question of how much? How much is it going to cost me? How much is it worth? And I think that those are questions that we will always struggle with love and relationships. And so both of these poems are reflective of that. If you missed last week's, please go back and have a look at it. If you feel the same, know that you're not alone. And I hope that you join me again for another poem next week. Have a good evening.